Senator Obama this question of whether or not national service would be elevated to a cabinet-level position. Among other things, Senator McCain said that if it were that, he would ask you to be his secretary. Would you ask him, if you're elected president,
well, I mean,
to run
if this is the deal he wants to make right now, I am committed to appointing him to my cabinet and national service. Look,
would you be willing to serve in his cabinet?
We've got a little work to do before we get to that point. Senator McCain's service is legendary, and one of the wonderful things about this campaign, I think, is his ability to share that story and himself inspire a whole new generation of young people to model what he did for this country. And so I think that one of the primary objectives of my presidency would be to lift up the opportunities for service in a bipartisan fashion so that we take it out of politics. Just very briefly, I want to give an example. There's a young man in Montana that I met named Matt Kuntz, who had been an infantry officer in the Army, was injured, was honorably discharged, got a law degree, and was working in corporate law. His half-brother served in the National Guard in Iraq, came back with post-traumatic stress disorder, was unable to get the counseling he needed, and ended up committing suicide. And Matt, having watched this painful process and trying to intervene, decided to quit his corporate law job and decided that he was going to take upon himself to create an advocacy group in Montana just around post-traumatic stress disorder for veterans. And now Montana has the best post-traumatic stress disorder treatment programs for National Guardsmen, and Matt has continued now in the non-profit sector. I make this point because I never asked Matt whether he was Democrat or Republican. I never asked Matt whether he was liberal or conservative. What I knew was that he had seen a wrong and was inspired to take action. And that kind of message, I think, is what has to be communicated each and every day by our president, by our political culture, and that's one of the reasons I'm running for president.
We asked Senator McCain the same question about Governor Palin's belittling being a community organizer. Did the Democrats in return belittle being a small-town mayor? Was she being unfair? Or was it hypocritical because Republicans actually say, hey, what people do in their private life is more important than public service?
Well, listen, we've had an awful lot of small-town mayors at the Democratic convention, I assure you. I meet them all the time. And the mayors have some of the toughest jobs in the country because that's where the rubber hits the road. You know, we yak in the Senate. They actually have to fill potholes and trim trees and make sure the garbage is taken away. So I was surprised by the several remarks around community organizing and belittling it. You know, when I think about the choice I made as a 23, 24-year-old to spend 3 years working with churches to help people help themselves, no insult to the president of this fine institution, but it was the best education I ever had, because it taught me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're given a chance and when they're brought together. And that's something I want to encourage for every young person. I want every young person around this country to recognize they will not fulfill their full potential until they hitch their wagon to something bigger. Now, that's not to say that we need talent in the private sector. We want talent in the private sector, but there are so many ways of serving voluntarily. You don't have to take the same path I did. But that's something that's a message that I think everyone should want to encourage, and I hope the Republicans want to encourage that as well.
Senator, picking up on this tone in the political campaigns, right. So much is said that's critical about people who are in Washington, the way right. Washington works, right. bureaucrats right. in Washington. How much responsibility do you think you and other presidential candidates, this year they're just the two of you major party candidates, have to change the rhetoric so that people who work in government, work right. in public service are respected?
Well, I think you make an important point. Look, Washington is broken. my whole campaign has been premised from the start on the idea that we have to fundamentally change how Washington works. That the domination of special interests, the domination of lobbyists, the loss of a civic culture in Washington among public servants has led to not only well-known disasters, like the mismanagement of the Katrina situation, but quiet disasters where you've got entire agencies that have been hollowed out, and you've got political appointees who aren't concerned with the mission of those organizations. So we've got to transform Washington, and we've got to do some house cleaning. But what we also want to do is to remind young people that if it weren't for government, then we wouldn't have a Civil Rights Act. If it weren't for government, we would not have the interstate highway system. If it weren't for government, we would not have some of our parks and natural wilderness areas that are so precious to America. And so part of my job, I think, as president, is to make government cool again. And to say to young people, to say to young people, even as we're transforming Washington, come on, we want you. We want you to get involved at every level. And by the way, you don't even have to join government. Part of what we're going to do is create transparency and accountability in how government works so that you can be an active citizen holding your public servants and elected officials accountable. That's one other aspect of citizenship, is paying attention to what's taking place. And part of what I've been thrilled about during the course of this campaign is how energized people have been, how interested people are. I mean, the viewership, both for the Democratic and Republican convention, broke all records. You know, we have seen the kinds of volunteerism in our own campaign, which, by the way, we're channeling not just to work on our campaign. We've had 1,000 hours of community service by our volunteers, not organized by us, but organized by themselves. And that's the kind of opportunity that I think we have to tap into.
Now, you mentioned civic participation is at an all-time high. Basically, you mentioned voluntary associations before. Back in the 19th century, the famous French scholar de Tocqueville came here and said, you know, America's voluntary associations make it unique and special. Right. Is volunteerism, is national service part of American exceptionalism? Is it part of what makes America special?
Yes. We have always balanced the tradition of individual responsibility and self-reliance with notions of community and love for country, in part because of voluntary associations. What it's done is it's allowed people to exercise the freedom to determine the direction of their communities, but still recognizing that we are part of a common project of creating a better life for the next generation. And that's something that's been lost. But what we're seeing in this campaign is it's something that people want to restore. And it requires responsibilities. I mean, part of what is interesting about our campaign, for example, is that when young people come in, we work them like dogs. I mean, and they are given big responsibilities. One of the striking things when you visit our troops in Iraq or Afghanistan, you've got 22, 23-year-old platoon leaders who are taking on life and death responsibilities and decision-making. We sell too many of our citizens short. They want to be involved, but we've got to start early. And that's part of the reason why I want to make sure that we've got opportunities in high school, we've got opportunities in college, that we help schools create a civic education system that involves community service so that these values are transmitted to the next generation. And I think parents would be thrilled to have their kids turn off the video game and get out there and do something. And you know what? It turns out the kids would